Hello, this is Jerry Morton. Welcome to my Finding My Way podcast. This is podcast number 38B, titled Soldier Skills. Podcasts 34 through 61 are stories from the year of Army training I experienced. The training started in August 1966 and ended in June 1967. The stories are published in the book Reluctant Lieutenant, From Basic to OCS in the 60s, which was published by Texas A&M University Press as a military history. Podcast 38B, Soldier Skills, is a continuation of Podcast 38A's account of the skills Jerry was to master during basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, in the fall of 1966. Those skills included the use of a gas mask, the use of a compass, guard duty, and interacting with officers. Jerry encountered problems in this learning process. Soldier skills. Good soldiers know how to put their gas masks on quickly. Their training has taught them this skill. Our training on the matter was fairly straightforward. You adjusted the straps so the mask fit snugly over your head. You checked to be sure you had a good seal by placing your hand over the snout-like breathing thing in the front and sucking in until you felt it tighten on your face because of the suction. If you feel air coming in from the edges, the straps need to be adjusted. You keep adjusting the straps until you get a good seal. After that, it's just a matter of responding correctly to the cry of gas. As soon as someone yells, "Gas!" you hold your breath, jerk open the bag carrying your mask. It is conveniently hanging from your shoulder. Having opened your gas bag, you quickly slip out your mask, check the seal, adjust the straps as needed, and just start breathing normally. Well, almost normally. You are sucking air in through a filtered snout. It does not just come in. There is a little work involved. On top of that, you cannot see very well with the mask on. You look out through two eyepieces that greatly limit your field of vision. There is a tendency to bump into or trip over things while wearing your mask. The sergeants have you repeat the drill for putting on your mask over and over and over. Then they will call out "gas" in the middle of some other activity, like when you are waiting in line to buy a honey bun or some other treat. All in all, people became fairly skilled at quickly putting on their gas masks. The big test of your gas mask skill was going into the gas chamber. A couple of sergeants who are already masked walk you and a few others into the chamber. Your mask is still in its case, hanging at your side. Once everyone is inside and the door to the little building has been closed, someone opens a small hole in the wall and tosses a tear gas canister. The sergeant's muffled cry of "gas" can be heard. Immediately you stop breathing and put on your mask. My testing went just fine. Several of the others had serious difficulty, though. One guy never did get his mask on. The biggest problem for most was getting a good seal. Those who could not began coughing and fumbling around for the door. Someone opened it fairly quickly, and they emerged from the chamber in a rush, with mucus streaming down from their nose and a flood of tears running down their cheek. Their condition, as observed by the unaffected, was a stern warning always to be ready to put your gas mask on and get a good seal. No one had bad enough enemies to want to be up close and personal with them as they suffered from exposure to tear gas. The only thing worse than being confronted by a gasping, mucus-flowing nosed person with eyes involuntarily shut and tears streaming down from their red, swollen slits was having that person be you. Along with the regular gas attack response drills were the nerve gas attack drills. Again, when the cry was given, you stopped everything and began taking protective action. The nerve gas drill was somewhat more abstract. We simulated it. Part of the protective action involved taking a small piece of specifically treated cloth and pretending to blot off blots of the persistent form of the nerve agent that wound up on your outer garment or exposed skin. Like the bayonet and hand-to-hand combat moves, we would have to demonstrate these skills at the end of basic training during the final proficiency test. Not getting lost was another skill the Army valued in its soldiers. To prove it to us, the Army had us use a compass to find our way to lots of stakes in the ground. They called this dead reckoning, and it was one of the easier tasks for me. I had always prided myself on being able to use a compass, one of many skills I had learned in the Boy Scouts. In the main, the sergeants doing the instructing were very patient. A lot of guys had never seen a compass before. The Army compass I was issued was more complicated than the Boy Scout compass I had used, but the principle was the same. It could not be any different. We spent a lot of time on compass courses. Fort Dix had been a basic training complex for a long time. Every compass course we went on had a trail beat into the underbrush that was totally free of vegetation. So many feet had walked down each compass trail that the ground was worn down below the level of the surrounding topsoil. Using the compass was only necessary to get you started on the right path. At least, that was how it appeared at first glance. During the day, you could locate landmarks and fix your compass bearing on them. Once a landmark was fixed, you just walked up to it and took another fix. Say, for example, that your compass course card says that from your starting point, a numbered stake beside the gravel road bed, you are to find a stake in the woods that is on a compass reading of 36 degrees from your stake. All you have to do is point the compass spinning north seeking arrow to 0 degrees and then twist the movable top 36 degrees. Next, you pop up this nifty sighting device on the movable top and look through it. Spotting a prominent landmark through the aiming sight aligned with the 36-degree mark, you just walked up to it. A thin wire running down the middle of the aiming slit makes the selection of a landmark much easier. In addition, there is a neat little magnifying glass attached to the sight finder that you look through to see the small degree markings on the compass. I could never see any of the numbers easily with it. In a pinch, you could also use the magnifying glass to start a fire. You just let the sun shine through it and focus the rays on a piece of paper. That was another tip I got from the Boy Scout handbook that I thought would be helpful someday. You could set your compass bearing on a dead tree, a big rock, a trunk of a big tree, a hilltop, or a building. Whatever it is, you walk straight to it. As you walk, you look for the stake in the ground. Your compass course card tells you that the stake you are looking for is so many yards from the starting stake. That is not much help, though, because the rough terrain makes it impossible to accurately judge distances. If you should walk past that stake, you are in for a long day. Looking for something that is not there is tedious. Your nerves get on edge as you begin to suspect that you have made a mistake. Since you start your compass training with 4 or 5 other trainees, you quickly find the flaws inherent in committee work. You begin to realize at the very beginning that there are many things that can go wrong with your compass reading. Perhaps some of the metal attached to your fatigue caused the magnetic needle to stray from magnetic north. Your web belt and buckle is made of iron. It could be the culprit. Or maybe your steel pot caused the needle to stray by a few degrees. Being 5 degrees off is no big deal if you only have to walk 30 yards, unless you are looking for buried treasure. It is a big deal if you have to walk 3,000 yards. A 2-foot-high, 1 inch by 1 inch wooden stake painted red is hard to see when you are 100 feet from it in dense underbrush, even if the ground around it has been trampled to dust within a 10-foot radius. Another problem could have been that your hands were shaking when you were sighting in on your landmark, making the needle jump around a lot. In that case, the best you could do was estimate where 36 degrees was. Estimates have a tendency to be wrong, particularly when you are tired, irritable, and know that you could have been done several hours before if earlier mistakes had been avoided. Once you found your stake, you pulled out your course card, read the instructions for finding the next point, and took your reading. Relieved, you and your happy companion set off once again. Usually each team was given 5 or 6 stakes to find, and then it was over. Those who completed the course first sat around smoking and joking, while they waited for the less fortunate to find their way to the final point. Smoking and joking was a big deal. Whenever you were being instructed or performing a training task, everyone wanted you to be quiet. Even when you were marching, they expected you to have your canteen, ammo magazines, rifle sling, backpack, and all the other items you were carrying anchored down so that you did not sound like a tinker's truck bumping down the road. You know, the old truck with pots and pans hanging on its sides. The Western movies had the same thing with the old chuck wagon jolting down the trail behind the herd of cattle. Making noise was a sure way to get some sergeant to jump your case. No matter how hard you tried, you just could not keep from making noise. Sergeants were always writing you about it. If you were not the specific target of their wrath, it was because someone else had made the bad judgment to make more noise than you did. Taking a 10-minute or longer break from the whole game meant you could talk, sit down, and smoke. All of our packaged C-ration meals came with a complimentary pack of 4 cigarettes. All of the major brands were represented. One package of C-rations would contain Winston's, and another came with Camel's or some other brand. Guys were always trading. I usually gave mine away. Smoking a pipe was my thing. Never having mastered the art of inhaling was no deterrent to my smoking. Smoking the pipe gave me something to do. Some of the sergeants could not understand that you needed to rest just because you were physically tired. All of them understood the need to stop to have a smoke. No smoky, no needy to have a resty. I smoked my pipe a lot. Sometimes it is the subtle things in life that ease the basic burdens. A few guys just never could find their stakes on the compass course. I was grateful to them. They provided us with nice, long rest periods. After a while, they would wander across a stake in the woods. Any stake in a storm will do. The voices of the more successful soldiers, smoking and joking, guided them to the end of the course. Naturally, the last stake they chose to call their own was wrong. The sergeants always went out of their way to help them understand that they had made significant errors in judgment. As our compass reading skills improved, we started going into two-man crews. Having just one partner sure made decision-making easier. If he was sharp, the two of you could zip on through. Traversing the compass course at night was a lot more difficult. The first thing we were told was never to use a flashlight. There was a rush to the PX to buy flashlights. Since you could not see a lot of landmarks at night, you used your partner as one. After establishing the correct course from your compass reading, your partner walked in that direction until you could barely see him. You whispered for him to stop. Logically, you would yell at him to stop. But that was a violation of what the sergeants called noise discipline. It took a little practice to get so you could whisper loud enough for him to hear, but not loud enough to attract the sergeant's attention. Sometimes your partner did not hear you. He would disappear into the darkness. With both of you looking for each other, the night had the potential of being very long. When the two of you lost sight of each other, there was a degree of confusion about how to get back together. Shouts in the darkness usually brought you together, but the risk of bringing a sergeant to your rendezvous point was always present. Once your partner stopped at the edge of your field of vision, you directed him to move to the left or right until he was standing on the correct compass heading. This frequently resulted in some dramatic falls. With both of you concentrating on achieving the correct alignment, no one was focused on the ground. Hidden logs, holes in the ground, stones, and other obstacles were often found by unsuspecting feet. The crash of a falling body in the dead of night is quite dramatic. Such sounds were always followed by muttered curses, as well as laughter from those who did not fall. Of course, you could never be sure that you had gotten an accurate compass reading in the dark. Thus, your risk of getting lost was significantly higher at night. In the best of situations, night compass courses meant little sleep. Having a flashlight significantly reduced your time on the course if you used it properly. The biggest advantage was that the guy serving as the landmark could go deeper into the woods. He held his fingers over the lens before turning the light on. Little peeps of light were all that made it through those pressed fingers. They were enough for you to sight in on him and give him directions to move to the correct spot for the reading. This was always risky business. A sergeant might see the light and give you hell. If the light was too bright, it could ruin your night vision. That was the pits. You started stumbling all over the place. Without your natural night vision, moving in the woods is a terrible experience. If Charlie, the Viet Cong or VC, was out there hiding in the bush, you were dead. There was no way you could keep from sounding like an elephant crashing through a glass factory. Of course, you were probably dead anyway. He just shot wherever the light appeared in the air. You stopped his round. Becoming dependent upon a flashlight for taking compass readings at night was definitely a bad thing. On the other hand, there were no VC at Fort Dix. There were only sergeants. With the assistance of the flashlight, your partner could move farther away from you in the darkness. This meant that you had to stop fewer times and take fewer sightings. You saved time. Without the flashlight, you would lose sleep. Lost sleep meant being irritable and tired the next day. That meant making mistakes that could get you hurt. Getting hurt could set you back in basic training. A lot of people chose the lesser of the evils. Flashlights were definitely in. Fortunately, I had good night vision. Except in extreme cases, my partners and I did not have to use them. Extreme cases meant it was very, very dark that night, or we were short on time. Even then, we never seemed to make up much on the time side of things. Late one night, we were on a long march back to the barracks after completing a compass course. Overall, I was feeling pretty good, as were many of the other guys. A dozen or so trainees had gotten seriously lost out on the course. That meant the rest of us got to lie down and relax. Some guys slept, others talked. Everyone smoked. Finding lost campers in the dark woods does not make Boy Scout leaders or sergeants happy. Sergeant Soto was in a particularly foul mood. He kept telling people to stop talking and coughing. Since he could not see more than 10 or 20 soldiers at a time in the dimness, his words had little impact. Finally, he gave the order for the company to form up. He marched us at a brisk pace forward. Sergeant Boone and Zarconi were moving up and down the platoon, trying to catch people talking. As soon as one soldier was reprimanded, the murmuring voices of a few others could be heard somewhere else in the ranks. "Company, halt!" Sergeant Soto's pitched scream pierced our ears. "You want to talk, do you? I'll show you who wants to talk. Put on your gas masks." A collective groan from all 250 of us rose in the night air as we pulled them out and adjusted them onto our faces. The damn things were hot. They always made it hard to breathe. "Forward, march!" came the order. We leaned into it, the muffled voices taking on an eerie sound as complaints ruffled through the ranks. "That's it! That's it, you assholes!" Sergeant Soto was pissed. "Double time! March!" he ordered. My breathing immediately became labored. Straining to get air and never getting enough is bad. It is seriously bad. Then the damn eyepieces began to fog over. Everyone's lenses were fogged. People were falling down. Others fell over them. But the sergeants ordered us on. The fallen would bungle their way up and rejoin the formation, only to fall again. It was hard. Guys pulled their masks from their face and rested them on the tops of their heads, only to be confronted by shouting sergeants. Using the finger of my non-rifle-carrying hand, I broke the seal of my mask. The night air rushing over my face felt cool. It was good. Sergeant Boone screamed at me to remove my hand. I did so immediately. However, the seal of my mask had been broken. I slightly nudged it a little more askew. This allowed enough fresh air to enter the mask so that I could breathe properly. Not only that, but my lenses began to clear. It was still unpleasant, but it was bearable. With the lenses fairly clear, it was easy to dodge those who kept tripping and falling. I wondered why more of them did not catch on to this small but important adjustment to their gas masks. From the continuing droppings of bodies around me, it was obvious that a whole lot of guys missed the point. Sometimes not having a good seal was better. Standing guard duty at night was another important skill the Army wanted us to have. There was a stylized ritual to the task. From my perspective, the important thing was not getting jumped by a crook or being made a fool of by an officer. The probability of encountering a crook was low, but having an officer on your case was high. We would be marching off to some isolated spot as a squad. One by one, the sergeant of the guard would take the man at the front of the line and tell him to guard a spot. The old guard became the last man in the line. Then the sergeant marched the remainder of the squad off into the darkness. There you were, all alone with your M14 on your shoulder. It did not have a magazine in it. Your ammo magazines were in pouches hooked to your web belt. The magazines were full of blanks. They were good for making a lot of noise. They could inflict damage only if the supposed attacker got very close to you. Instead of firing a bullet from the round, it shot out a paper wad that sealed the gunpowder in the crimped shell casing. We had been repeatedly warned not to aim our weapons at anyone close to us when firing our blank rounds, because the paper wad could strike someone in the eye and penetrate through to the brain. If that happened, the poor guy was dead. You could kill someone or seriously injure him with that paper wad. Should you be unlucky enough to have an officer test you on your knowledge of guard duty protocol, you had better do it right, or else. I was never sure what "or else" meant, except that it did not sound good. When someone approaches your guard post, you are to shout out the password. If the shadowy figure is one of the good guys, he shouts back the countersign. This simple procedure seemed to pose several problems. If there were bad guys around, they would hear the two of you shouting back and forth. Should they decide to attack, they now knew exactly where you were, which meant that you would be killed in the first few moments of the assault. Another problem was that a loud exchange of the sign and countersign would clue bad guys in on the code words so that they could trick you into letting them get real close. Logic says it is very bad to let someone intent on killing you get too close. Thus, you wanted to shout out the password just loud enough for the approaching person to hear it, but no one else. It was a tricky maneuver. Too soft to yell, and he did not hear you. Too strong a yell, and everyone knew you were there. Anyway, you were supposed to shout out the password. If the guy shouted back the countersign, you kept on marching back and forth and let him pass through. Things got complicated if the guy was a good guy but did not know the countersign. You ordered him to halt. If he does not, you shoot him. It was a pretty simple process once you got the basics down. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, the approaching person almost always stops. When this happens, you order him to place his military ID on the ground in front of him. Take 15 steps backward and then stop. Oh, I forgot to mention that you have your rifle trained on him all this time. Somewhere in this process, you have slipped a magazine into it. Cautiously, you approach the ID card and inspect it. The guy's picture matches his face. You let him through. The darkness makes this process work better on paper than in reality. It does not make any difference if he is an officer or not. We were told that this was the way it was done. I spent a lot of night hours walking alone in the dark on guard duty. Once, I actually had someone wander into the area I was guarding. I could hear him approaching in the darkness. The place I was protecting for democracy was a fenced-in supply area. There was gravel all around it. The crunch of footsteps approaching me sent chills up my neck. A shadowy figure took form. "Halt!" I ordered. The steps stopped. The figure just stood there. Swinging my M14 into high port, just in case I needed to use it as a club, I barked out the password, "Bear!" Silence met my demand. The figure just stood there. "Bear!" I shouted out with an edge of real concern. The guy needed to say "track" to show everything was all right. "Bear!" I loudly demanded. No one told me what to do if someone just stood there. Hell, we might wind up standing there all night. "It's all right, son," a soft voice stated from the shadows. "I'm the officer of the day." "Place your ID on the ground at your feet and take 15 steps backward, sir," I demanded. Calmly, slowly, the figure reached back and pulled his wallet from his back pocket, laid something at his feet, and walked backward until he stopped. Cautiously, I approached the object on the ground. Bending down slowly, without taking my eyes off the potential attacker, I picked up the ID card. It was definitely a military ID card. That was all I could make out in the dark. The guy was too far back for me to see his face clearly, and it was too dark for me to see any distinguishing features in the photo of the card. Nothing in the Army ever seemed to go according to the book. It was very frustrating. What to do now was the big question. "Come forward, sir, please," I said in a subdued tone. The shadow became a real person with lieutenant bars. Fumbling the ID card to my left hand while trying to juggle my rifle with it as well, I raised my right hand and saluted. He returned my salute, saying, "Good job, soldier." "Thank you," I replied, dropping my salute. "Anyone else been by?" he asked, holding out his hand for his ID card. "No, sir," came my brisk reply as I gave him the card back. "Carry on," he ordered as his hand started up to salute again. Quickly, I shot my hand up to salute him as I replied, "Yes, sir." He left. When the sergeant of the guard came up with the rest of the squad to relieve me, no one said a word. I went to the end of the line and marched off to the barracks. A few hours of sleep were better than none. Interacting with officers was something our company commander, First Lieutenant Brown, seemed to think was a good skill. He passed out our pay to us. We got paid at the end of each month. We were given cash in an envelope. Married men got more than single men. They called it an allotment. The money went straight to your wife. There was some flexibility in how much went to her and how much you got on payday. I had the full allotment sent to Anna. The rest of my pay, about $97, was in the envelope Lieutenant Brown handed me each month. The entire company lined up in alphabetical order to be paid. When we got to the table where Lieutenant Brown was sitting, we were to salute. While holding the salute, we were to say, "Sir," state our rank and full name, last name first, and then say we were reporting for pay. The lieutenant would return the salute, hand you your pay envelope, and you would move to the left to the table beside him. There stood Sergeant Soto. You were expected to give him a donation for the United Way. Sergeant Soto had already told us that the lieutenant wanted every man to contribute to the United Way. The company would get a ribbon to hang over our unit flag, signifying 100% of us had given donations. We were sternly warned that no man had better mess up that record. "Sir, Private Morton, Jerome H., reporting for pay," I crisply announced with my right hand locked in a sharp salute. Without looking up, the lieutenant returned my salute and handed me the envelope. I took it and slid over to Sergeant Soto's table. Taking out my money, I handed him a $5 bill. I resented having to do it, but it was the Army way. In my mind, I resolved that once I got out of the Army, I would never again allow myself to be forced to give money to charitable organizations. Until then, I had never understood the implications of an organization having a 100% employee contribution. It meant that coercion was taking place. The second time I went to get paid by the lieutenant, I felt like I was an old Army guy. There was not the tension that I had experienced in our first encounter. I had not continuously rehearsed in my mind what it was I was supposed to say to the lieutenant, as I had done the first time. "Sir, Private Morton," I said, stuttering my last name. "Oh my God, I've messed up." With my salute stuck to my head, I finally got out. "Sir, Private Morton, Jerome H. reports." Raising his head, the lieutenant smiled at me and said, "Reports for what, soldier?" My hand was still glued to my forehead. I rapidly blurted out, "Sir, Private Morton reports for pay." The lieutenant laughed, returned my salute, handed me my pay envelope, and shook his head as he said, "And you want to be an officer, Morton? Knock out 50 push-ups here beside my table." "Yes, sir," I responded as I moved to the side and began pumping out the push-ups in perfect form. It was not hard to do them. In fact, it was a piece of cake. What was hard was the humiliation. As I knocked them out, he continued to hand out pay envelopes to the other guys. How had he known I was going to OCS? It did not seem possible that he could remember our first encounter with the shaving cream disaster on day 1. This was just the third time the lieutenant and I had interacted. I wanted to do well, and I had not done so. That was embarrassing. The mistake was so stupid. I would try to avoid being intimidated by an officer again, I thought.